Good morning, good afternoon, or indeed good evening, depending on when you are watching. I'm James Innes, the Jobs Guru, and today I'll be talking about illegal interview questions and how to handle them. So, illegal interview questions. A friend of mine told me the other day that his wife went for an interview and she was asked a series of questions that she found inappropriate and she didn't quite know how to respond. The questions included, how old are you? What does your husband do? And are you planning on having a baby? Interviewers may question you on a whole range of different subjects, but you need to know that they do not have the right to ask you anything they please. There are a number of topics which the law specifically prohibits them from discussing. The main reason an interviewer will ask such questions is that they are lacking in experience. An HR professional will be well aware of the rules and generally steer clear of such questions. An owner manager of a small company, on the other hand, might very well be blissfully ignorant that it is illegal to ask such a seemingly innocent question as, do you have any children? Why are certain questions illegal? Whilst most questions that an interviewer asks are designed to help discriminate between different candidates, they should be discriminating on the grounds of your ability to do the job. They should not be discriminating on one of a number of grounds which are deemed to be unfairly discriminatory. Unfairly discriminatory because they are not relevant to your ability to undertake the role for which you are applying. What should you do when confronted with an illegal question? Answering an illegal question is going to be a real test of your diplomatic abilities. There's no two ways about it. First of all, you face the problem that depending on how they phrase their question, it might be hard to establish whether it really is an illegal question or just an inappropriate personal question. But assuming it definitely is an illegal question, if you point this out to the interviewer, that they shouldn't have asked it and that you have no intention of answering it, then I can virtually guarantee that it's going to destroy your chances of getting the job. This is especially so if the interviewer was totally unaware that it was an illegal question, which will generally be the case. Whilst I have the utmost respect for the laws which attempt to protect candidates from discrimination, in practice the best solution is going to be for you to answer the question, but aim to sidestep it and steer the conversation away from this particular topic. So what types of illegal question might you have to face? Well, there's a whole host of possible questions you might be asked, which will to one degree or another fit the definition of illegal. However, they can be broken down into a small number of key areas: age discrimination, sexual discrimination, racial discrimination, religious discrimination, disability discrimination, and finally, discrimination on the basis of spent criminal convictions. Now, I'll cover each of these in turn, starting with age discrimination. I'm going to do them in order. Now, an interviewer could ask, how old are you? Which you might think is a reasonably harmless question, although possibly a little personal. Alternatively, they might elaborate on the question in such a way as to reveal why questioning you on your age is simply not acceptable. For example, aren't you a little young to hold a position of this level? Aren't you perhaps a little old to cope with this job? These questions might very well make you feel rather more uncomfortable. Are they discriminatory? Are you indeed too young to be able to have a position of such responsibility or authority? Or are you too old to keep up with such a fast-paced role? Of course not. William Pitt was just 24 when he became Britain's youngest Prime Minister. He went on to spend a total of 20 years in office during the course of a highly distinguished career. William Gladstone, on the other hand, was still going strong as British Prime Minister at the age of 84. Now, I'll admit these are fairly extreme examples that I've picked for you, but being Prime Minister of Great Britain is a fairly extreme job, and whether 24 years old or 84 years old, both these individuals succeeded admirably. The Equality Act of 2010 makes it quite clear that an interviewer should not be questioning you on your age. You should no longer even put your date of birth on your CV. Whilst an interviewer has the right to make their selection on the basis of experience, which may sometimes favour more mature candidates, they should not rule someone out on the recruitment process just on the basis of age. If you're faced with a question concerning your age, phrase your answer in such a way as to demonstrate to the interviewer that your age is just not a relevant factor. It's your skills and experience that count. Use this question as an opportunity to reiterate your key selling points and how they match the requirements of the job. I would note that legislation is always complicated, and I have of necessity simplified the interpretations that I'm giving this video today. You should be aware that there are always exceptions to every rule. For example, if you are older than or within 6 months of an employer's normal retirement age, then an employer does have the right to reject your application on these grounds. But most exceptions are fairly minor and will only apply to a very small percentage of individuals. Let's move on to sexual discrimination. Whilst it's normally very clear when a question is discriminatory on the grounds of age, sexual discrimination can be a lot less obvious. Sexual discrimination is normally a greater problem for female applicants. However, it is important to be aware that male applicants can also be targeted. It all depends on the circumstances and the precise line of questioning that an interviewer adopts. Are you married might seem an innocuous enough question to ask either a man or a woman, and it's not actually illegal for an interviewer to ask this. However, it can rapidly lead on to a whole gamut of questions which clearly contravene the Equality Act of 2010. Do you have any children? Do you plan to have any children? I mentioned earlier. When do you plan to have children? You're not pregnant, are you? Previously, many candidates would actually volunteer information about their family on their CV, marital status, married, 3 children, whatever. However, this is now considered a potential invitation to discriminate, and it is definitely no longer recommended. Once an interviewer has established your marital status and whether or not you have children, it may lead them into severely discriminatory territory. What impact will the travel requirements of this job have on your family? How does your wife, girlfriend, husband, boyfriend feel about you taking this job? Is arranging childcare going to cause problems for you? Your marital status is not relevant to your ability to do the job. Your family is your own private business. What impact this job may have on members of your family and whether taking this job might cause you any problems are issues that you will have to deal with. They have nothing to do with your employer, and they don't have any right to be questioning you on such subjects. So when faced with such questions, it's probably not going to be to your advantage to take offence. I mean, try to handle such questions in a very matter-of-fact manner, and if you can identify your interviewer's concerns, perhaps, you may wish to address these. But make sure you don't come across as being defensive. The interviewer shouldn't have asked you the question in the first place, so hold the moral high ground. Besides questions relating to your marital status and your children, it's worth mentioning that there are a variety of other lines of questioning which are deemed to constitute sexual discrimination, including questions regarding your sexual orientation. Whilst these are less likely to crop up in interviews, it has been known. Now, on to racial discrimination. It's important to note that racial discrimination isn't limited just to the colour of your skin. Racial discrimination can be a whole lot more subtle than that. It could come down to a simple difference of nationality, or even the town or county in which you were born. However, it is usually pretty obvious whether or not a question is racially discriminatory. Where were you born? Where do you come from? What is your mother tongue? These types of questions are normally totally irrelevant and are consequently discriminatory. Whilst an employer has the right to ensure that you're entitled to work in the UK and is allowed to select on the basis of your ability to communicate in English, or any other language for that matter, they are not allowed to discriminate arbitrarily on the basis of your geographic or ethnic origins. Racial discrimination is one of the most widespread and pervasive forms of discrimination, and many of my viewers will be painfully aware of that fact. My advice would be to answer any such questions in a factually correct fashion, and to say no more. This isn't a topic you want to dwell on. As I've previously mentioned, the interviewer is not necessarily prejudiced, they might just be curious and inexperienced. If, however, you suspect the interviewer is prejudiced in some way, then you need to ask yourself, would you really want to work with or for such an individual anyway? Would you be prepared to take the matter further and make a formal complaint? Another question you should be asking yourself. And these are questions that only you can answer. Personally, I feel that whilst it may be in your own best interest to let the matter drop, this world needs people to stand up to such behaviour if we're ever to succeed in eradicating it completely. Moving on, let's discuss religious discrimination. Discrimination on religious grounds is rare. Whilst religious differences continue to be the cause of conflict, we nevertheless live in an increasingly secular society. Interviewers are unlikely to question you as to your religious beliefs, largely because the issue is unlikely to cross their minds. And the most likely reason for the idea to pop into their heads is if some aspect of your appearance outwardly reveals your beliefs. For example, you might wear a Star of David on your necklace. Religious discrimination is also closely linked with racial discrimination, of course, and if an interviewer has identified a racial difference between you, they may also suspect a religious difference. The bottom line is that this question is, in almost all cases, completely and utterly irrelevant. It's absolutely none of the interviewer's business. There is, however, nothing to be gained by getting indignant. My advice would be the same as for a racially focused question. Answer factually, but don't elaborate. The interviewer will hopefully move swiftly on to other, more appropriate topics. Next up, disability discrimination. It is permissible for an employer to question you as to whether or not you have a disability. However, the Equality Act 2010 generally prevents them from taking a disability into account when making their selection. On this basis, one might wonder why they have the right to ask you to interview and why it can't wait until a firm job offer has been made. The reason is that an employer is only obliged to make reasonable adjustments to accommodate a disabled person. If despite such adjustments a candidate would still be unable to do the job effectively as a result of their disability, then the employer is nonetheless allowed to reject the application. There are various ways in which an interviewer could approach this topic. Do you have a disability? How do you cope with your disability? Can you undertake this job with your disability? What adjustments would we need to make to accommodate you and your disability? However they go about questioning you, your aim should be to briefly disclose the nature of disability and then go on to detail the adjustments which would be required for you to undertake the role, whatever they may be. Whilst it's uncommon for an employer to discriminate on the basis of a disability itself, the interviewer may have concerns as to the changes that will need to be made. If you're aware of state funding which may be available to support such changes, then you can go a long way towards allaying any such fears. You should also reassure them that subject to these changes, you will be able to undertake the role just as effectively as a non-disabled person. Finally, let's discuss criminal convictions. The law does not currently provide a great deal of protection for those with criminal convictions. While some might feel that such individuals don't deserve any protection, I feel this is a very short-sighted attitude. Failure to rehabilitate offenders by helping them to reintegrate into society will inevitably lead to higher levels of recidivism. Limited protection is afforded by the Legal Aid, Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act of 2012, which allows for certain criminal convictions to be deemed spent after what is termed a rehabilitation period. If a criminal conviction is spent, then you are permitted to conceal it from a prospective employer, with certain exceptions. And if you have any criminal convictions, then it is vital to be aware of what this rehabilitation period is. The Act also makes it unlawful for record-keeping bodies, such as the Disclosure and Barring Service, to disclose details of such convictions. However, these general rules do not apply to certain employers and organisations. The rationale is to ensure that employers and organisations offering certain sensitive positions, professions and licences can access an applicant's full criminal history before reaching a decision. If you're in any doubt as regards your own specific circumstances, then it's always advisable to seek appropriate professional advice. If you have any convictions which aren't yet spent, then you are legally obliged to disclose them, if asked, only if asked. And as the law stands, a recruiter is not formally prohibited from taking this into account when making a selection. One final point on convictions. A story is told of the interviewee who, upon being asked if he had a criminal record, replied, "Yes, Light My Fire" by Will Young. Apocryphal, most likely. But that is nonetheless a pretty dreadful record, isn't it? Thumbs up if you agree. And I'd like to conclude today by just briefly touching on some exceptions to these rules, what are known as genuine occupational requirements, or GORs, attractive name, yeah? In cases where an individual's age, gender, sexual orientation, race or religion is genuinely required for them to be able to effectively perform a role, then an employee is permitted to claim a GOR and discriminate on one or more of these grounds, with the onus being on the employer to demonstrate that the personal characteristic concerned is indeed vital to the role. For example, whilst your gender should normally be irrelevant to your ability to do your job, it would of course not be unreasonable for an employer looking for someone to work in a female-only spa to request that only female candidates apply for the role. To cite another example, a halal butcher must of course be a Muslim. What do you think about all of this, viewer? Let me have your comments in the comments section below. Now, the advice I've given today has been taken directly from my book, the interview book. I have a copy here to hand somewhere. There we go. It is, as they say, available in all good bookshops, or if you'd like a signed copy from yours truly, then there is a link in the description which accompanies this video. Thank you for watching today. Keep safe and be well, my friends. Goodbye.